Hello, and welcome to another episode of Pop Matters. I'm your host, Professor Lincoln Geraghty, and each month we'll be looking at popular culture matters and if they matter, from comics to sci-fi and all things fan-based. This month I have joining me Dr. Simon Hobbs, Senior Lecturer in Visual Culture, Dr. Megan Hoffman, Independent Researcher, and Tia Price, PhD student in the School of Art, Design and Performance. In this episode, we'll be discussing true crime on TV. Before we get to our main topic of conversation, we'd like to start with a roundup of the last few weeks in pop culture news. Now, it seems like every episode of Pop Matters has a little Neighbours update since last time. Not only has the soap been saved, we have old episodes streaming on Amazon Prime through their free streaming platform, and we have new episodes later in 2023. A welcome turnaround for fans and for the actors. Now, everyone probably knows by now that I live and breathe Neighbours, but maybe if you're not so much Neighbours fans, but what do you think about this turnaround and the role fans might have played in it? Simon?
Cheers for that, Lincoln.
Yeah.
Not a big neighbourino, I have to be honest. Yes, good, right?
Yeah.
I can come like that. It's obviously, I guess, you know, streaming platforms, and we'll perhaps talk about this in our chat later, play such a crucial role in generating spaces for new content and creating the desire and the need for new content. So something with the legacy of Neighbours is bound to be a bit of a catch for a streaming platform, really, because it's going to draw in people. Nostalgia is a big thing at the moment as well, so that's going to attract people as well. So it's not really too surprising, I guess, with the history that the show's got and the clamour for content that's currently happening.
Sure. Now, there has been a lot of things happening this weekend. Oscars, right? And Simon, you wanted to bring us a little bit of Oscars news and comment on the big hit, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, if I said it right.
Yes, you did.
What's the latest on that, and who were the big winners on the night?
Well, that film was a big winner. It cleared up. It really kind of won most of the big awards. I only recently watched it. I didn't know it's been out for a while, and I didn't really know too much. And I don't take too much notice of the Oscars. And I think we've been chatting a little bit today about its kind of win and whether it's Oscar worthy or whether it deserves to win Best Picture. And I'm not quite sure what Oscar worthy means, but I think what's important is representation. And I think the key thing really is in a show, the Oscars, for what it's worth, it's got a level of kind of legitimacy and authenticity, and it has a role to play in culture where it can celebrate or, as it has done in the past, maybe marginalise certain communities and certain people. And I think kind of lavishing Everything Everywhere All at Once with so many awards, I think is a real, I think that's a good move, really. Yeah. I think it's an important move for certain communities, regardless if it's the best film or not. That's a subjective choice, and the Oscars only ever takes a very small view of what cinema is anyway, and always has. So I think it's a really kind of positive step, particularly after the furore from last year and all the negativities that surrounds these, and has surrounded it in the past with who's being nominated, who's not being nominated. Yeah. I think it's an important moment, I think, regardless of, beyond the film, I guess. The film I enjoyed, it's funny, it's weird. Yeah. I didn't love every second of it, but equally it is interesting. I think it's a really nice story about kind of mental health and parental love and acceptance in there. But I think more important is the celebration of communities that have perhaps been ignored within those very mainstream things in the past.
And that's certainly seen with Michelle Yeoh winning Best Female Performance in a film. Yeah. A nostalgia kick as well for fans of Indiana Jones. See Ke Huy Quan winning Best Supporting Actor.
Exactly.
Brings back all those soft, safe memories of 80s nostalgia,
Yeah, I think so. And it's nice to see people enjoy themselves at those events and not get slapped or feel
there were no one died this time.
It
no one was
really
slapped,
nice,
kicked.
It's nice to give people their moments.
Now, the nostalgia train, we've got season 3 of Mandalorian, right, on Disney Plus, Megan?
Your
thoughts so far?
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I think it's the greatest show. I have a little bit of a bone to pick, though, because it turns out, and I wouldn't necessarily consider myself like a casual Star Wars fan. Like I'm pretty invested
you're hardcore
in being a Star Wars fan.
Yeah.
However, I started watching the Book of Boba Fett and I was so bored.
That seems to have been a common response to Boba Fett. Yeah.
And so I didn't finish it. I watched about an episode and a half. And then later come to find out that in order to understand what's going on in The Mandalorian season 3, you have to have watched the Book of Boba Fett, like episodes 5 through 8 or whatever it was.
It's not just Grogu, it's all about also the Mando's journey in rehabilitation and sort of bringing himself back from shame, isn't it?
Yeah. And Simon and I were kind of talking about it a little bit and how kind of emotionally manipulative The Mandalorian is, because it sort of like left you at the end of season 2 thinking, oh, they're going to be separated forever, and then all of a sudden it's like, boom.
They've got the best couple back together. You know, you can't separate Grogu from his dad, can you?
No, absolutely not.
Not even Luke Skywalker to do that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So looking forward to the rest of the season. You're caught up now.
I am. I'm caught up now.
Excellent. Brilliant. And Tia, you're interested in true crime. It's recent series started in January. You're going to tell us a little bit about?
Well, there are a few this year. There was a trend over the last couple of years where it's been about tapes, but this year, on the 17th of January, Hulu with ABC News released something called Web of Death, which is 6 episodes, which looks at amateur sleuths, amateur detectives who pick up cold cases, cold case murders, generally speaking, and investigate using DNA profiling and various other things that they can find online. I think it's kind of problematic, really, because it kind of puts it then into this sort of free-for-all-esque public domain in which people feel that they can then do these things. We saw this recently with the Nicola Bulley missing case, where there was a TikToker that said that they had right to go in there and they filmed her body in the water. So there's this. It presents this problem where people there's a blurring of the lines, and though it's a TV show, people can too easily feel that they have a right to start engaging in it. And so that's my news.
At what point is entertainment, not entertainment anymore, but into the realms of, as you said, crime and investigative practices that aren't the audience's remit, really?
No, absolutely. But that's the problem, because the entertainment value and the actual reality can get blurred. And I mean, obviously, mainstream general audiences are not necessarily going to leap on that and do something about it, but then some will. And some may then use it for their own profiles and social media likes, etc., as we saw with the recent TikToker.
And you mentioned this is on Hulu, so going back to Simon's point about streaming platforms, have a tremendous amount of space for content, and clearly true crime, and we'll obviously talk about that in our main discussion, but with this series, it's another example of that genre finding a place on a streaming platform.
Yeah, definitely.
Have Hulu got a past in this? Is this their first attempt at?
I don't think it's their first attempt. I think they've had others, but I couldn't give you an example, so forgive me on that one. But I think there have been others, because true crime is so big. I mean, Jean Murley says there's been a boom. Tanya Horek says that on true crime streaming networks, it's been massive in the last few years. So I wouldn't say it was their first step into it, but I'd need to check that.
Sure. Well, there's plenty of research material there for your project,
certainly is, yeah.
And that leads us nicely into our main topic of conversation, the popularity of true crime TV and the sheer amount of it that, you've been studying in your own research. Thanks for that. Thanks for a survey of all the important pop culture news. We'll keep abreast of the neighbour situation. I'm sure Mandalorian, I'm sure Grogu will also, eventually save our day. So panellists have published on and currently researching true crime in all its various forms, from aspects including the ethics of dramatising real-life crime, the impact on victims, fans of serial killers and true crime podcasts, to museums that preserve artefacts. Dark tourism too is also really popular. Streaming platforms like Netflix, Hulu have helped create a massive audience for documentaries and drama series on infamous serial killers such as Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, and of course age-old crimes like those of Jack the Ripper continually inspire fascination and dramatisation. So why is this also popular with audiences? And that's why I gathered our researchers here today to talk about this. And Simon, I'll talk to you first. You and Megan have recently published on this hugely popular genre. Can you tell us why you think true crime is so well liked by people?
Yeah, and I think Tia's already alluded to it, and we've already kind of touched some of the key areas. I think the key thing is it's always been popular. There's always been and Tia could probably speak about this more than I can because of the directions her research has taken her in, but there's always been a morbid curiosity with death and violence and those kinds of things. And we can go, Jack the Ripper's obviously the famous case that everyone mentions. So it's always been popular. And we've had booms in, you mentioned the word boom, I think that's really useful in the kind of 70s and 80s. Right. And now we're experiencing one now. I think there's two key factors that me and Megan have found particularly interesting in this. One is platforms. So you mentioned Hulu, but Netflix is a huge kind of really has made true crime kind of water cooler TV. To use a phrase that's maybe a little bit out of date now, but everyone is watching. Making a Murderer or whatever it might be, The Staircase. These are huge shows to people now, on the same level as stuff like Mandalorian and stuff. They're big deals. But then because you've now got Amazon Prime as well, you've got Disney Plus, you've got Hey You. Hey You is a kind of quite trashy reality television.
Is that the one with the Kardashians?
Yeah, all the Kardashians, all the Real Housewives.
That is a true crime.
Yeah, that's lovely stuff. I mean, what lovely, you really have got it.
Yeah.
But that kind of stuff, even though it's kind of for that, has a huge true crime category in it of about 60 or 70 programs.
Really?
All kind of a lot of it original. I think they work with an American company called Oxygen. I think they got a lot of their stuff.
Yeah.
It's huge. It's massive. So the reason that I think it's popular with streaming platforms is probably because it's quite cheap. Those stories are already written. Documentary's quite a cheap form. They've got proven track records.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, those crimes are consistently happening.
Yes.
There's always new things breaking in the news. They can be produced quickly. That's one thing. So it serves a commercial purpose.
Yeah.
The second thing we find most interesting, and perhaps what has most defined our research, and Megan's going to speak about this in more detail later, but is the fact that this is happening now in a kind of post-Me Too age, for want of a better phrase. So what we have is this heightened idea of an awareness of female victimization, of the violence against women. We're perhaps more aware and sensitive to that as ever, as we are with many other issues. But on the other side of that coin, we have a complete fascination with that same body being destroyed over and over again, sexualized over and over again. So on the one hand, we're very concerned with these things, we're very sensitive, we're very worried, and we're campaigning and trying to kind of address misogyny in our culture in kind of powerful and important ways. To what success that's maybe not for us to discuss here, but that's an issue. And on the other side, we're sitting down to be entertained by those exact stories, and we're perhaps even to a point celebrating the worst offenders of them. We're putting in a kind of we were writing the other day and we mentioned the word pantheon, but there's certainly like certain killers who enjoy that status.
The top
and actually,
10 list.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Like a Rushmore kind of.
Yeah.
like
Oh wow. That would be a morbid tourist site, wouldn't it?
Wouldn't it? But your introduction kind of pointed towards those people. Those people have got a cachet. They're the worst offenders of this kind of these ideas that we're trying to tackle in society. But they become also the biggest stars.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we've really found interest of the kind of disconnect between a world that's trying to be more aware, and rightfully so, and trying to dismantle some of these issues, and an environment in which those same issues are consumed for entertainment, and unavoidably so. Everyone's engaging in that process. And even if you don't, it's hard to ignore. You'll see those images, you'll see those faces. As soon as you log in to any of these streaming platforms, and obviously, even terrestrial, if anyone's watching it, but BBC and Channel 4, and it's everywhere. It's not just streaming. So.
Yeah, ITV have done a number of sort of like primetime dramas around British serial killers and standout names. And it seems, as you said, of the day, it's currently popular. And I'm interested in that sort of morbid curiosity thing, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in relation to Tia's research. And you've co-published with Megan on true crime. What's your angle on true crime and your research in it? What do you particularly take out of it?
Yeah, I mean, so as Simon said, we focus on contemporary true crime, and we focus specifically on kind of post-#MeToo true crime. So when we say kind of post-#MeToo, we're talking about kind of post-Alyssa Milano's tweet about Harvey Weinstein in 2017. And we've kind of noticed that a lot of these true crime productions that are kind of post these conversations use some of the strategies like that were kind of influenced and introduced by the Me Too movement. So they'll interview in our first piece, our book chapter, we looked at kind of shows that cover cases that have been kind of done over and over and over again, like Ted Bundy Falling for a Killer on Amazon Prime, and the Yorkshire Ripper Files, very British crime story.
Okay.
So these kind of productions take these stories that have just been done so often, but they look at it in a different way, and they interview women who are involved with the cases, like either as survivors of the crimes themselves or as investigators. They do kind of profiles of the victims, talk to the victims' families, and show them as kind of fully rounded human beings rather than these kind of like forensic curiosities.
Okay. Yeah.
And kind of most importantly and most interestingly, they place the crimes in this like sociocultural context of like a wider sense of violence against women and misogyny.
Right.
And they kind of show that the scary thing isn't necessarily this like pathological individual. The scary thing is the society that enable these crimes to continue over and over and over again.
Keep happening.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you particularly fascinated with social media, as you were saying, hashtag, and the platform TikTok. How important a role does that sort of social media platform play in true crime and true crime investigation?
Well, we're actually working on a piece right now about true crime on TikTok.
Okay.
And we're kind of going at it from the angle of as TikTok as a space for digital activism.
Okay.
So TikTok is kind of quite interesting because you have these kind of very fan-based TikTok accounts.
Yeah.
And you have people like, I mean, as Tia will probably talk about, you have people kind of promoting murderabilia and like these little kind of, I mean, horrendous kind of murder-themed T-shirts and things like
Merchandise
that.
and
Merchandise,
yeah.
exactly,
Okay.
like merch. But you also get TikTok, these TikTokers who are like either victims of crimes themselves or who are like involved in cases themselves, and they're advocating for those cases, and they're looking at the true crime genre and saying this is what we think is ethical, this is what we think isn't ethical. So it becomes quite an important space for critique.
Okay, so they are self-reflexive in what they're doing, some of these TikTokers.
Yeah.
Because I'm not a TikToker myself. I don't really use the platform, but I just imagine it's 30 seconds of people waving and singing at the camera. But there's a more serious side to this.
Well,
There is that, of course, and I mean, we didn't know about TikTok before, really, so this was quite new to us as well. And there is all of that kind of stuff. And but you know, in the past, you know, it's been used as a platform to fight for kind of awareness about climate change and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And the company itself has sold itself, or tried to what success, I don't know, on this kind of educational basis, that it can educate people. It can be used for learning of different kind of routines. I think really TikTok kind of links to what we were saying in the start about platforms. If we've got these kind of Netflix and Hulu and Amazon as these kind of very professional platforms, we can see TikTok as an amateur platform that on the one hand encourages amateur sleuths and maybe the negative side, but on the other side does give people an important space in which they can air either grievances with the community at large, but also fight for causes that, you know, not every story gets picked up, and not every crime is solved, and not every crime is potentially interesting enough to be a Netflix show. So for all the interest that one show gathers, there's 1,000 where those stories are dead and no one's interested. So TikTok does become a platform for people who don't have you know, means to access traditional media forms. Don't have the polish for that, don't have the ability to do that, to grab their phone and say, you know, can we get news about this case out there? And campaign for their loved ones, or a story about, you know, that links to their community. So we see a lot of different voices come to the fore. I mean, true crime's a very white genre, and traditionally has been and continues to be. And TikTok replicates that sometimes, but also there's a space for people of colour to air, to have a space in which they could potentially reach a huge audience. Because it's not like Instagram or anything like that. The algorithm is more democratic, or meant to be. I mean, I don't know anything about algorithms, but that's what you're told it is. So there's a chance that your video could go onto the main feed.
Be viral.
Go viral without having to have 10 billion views or whatever these things, you know, usually need to gain traction.
I'm interested in the audience then. So is there a fandom of true crime? And if there is, you know, what makes a true crime fan? Is there any particular sort of thing that identifies a true crime fan?
Yeah, so T has been writing about this a lot, and I think...
Well, you've got true crime fans, and then you've got a more extreme form called dark fans. So true crime fans might be people that listen to serial podcasts, or they may watch a lot of Netflix documentaries or Hulu or whatever the platform, and they get very engaged with it. There was a study in '99 by someone called Laura Browder, and she looked at the audience of true crime and saw that it was gendered, mostly women, and that they were coming from it from a few perspectives, to feel safe, to feel prepared if it were to happen to them, and that sort of thing. So that's true crime fans. But then what I look at, and the group I'm looking at, are called dark fans or dark fandoms, and they are more extreme in their engagement. It doesn't mean to suggest that they're going to go running off and committing murders or emulating per se, you know, but they engage with the subject matter, and their identification is more to do with the pathologized individual than perhaps the justice or the moralistic undertow, or the victim or any of that. And so Ryan Broll was the person that came up with the term, and he looked at a group of people on a subreddit feed called Columbiners, or who referred to themselves as Columbiners, and they sympathised is probably a bit too strong, but they identified or sympathised a little bit with the perpetrators of the Columbine High School massacre in 1999. And they engaged in fan practices of engaging sort of subcultural capital, engaging information and stories, and also trying to find the reasons behind why they did it. He then, so Ryan Broll, the researcher, then extended that to suggest people that are fans of those who commit heinous crimes. So not just Columbiners, but others. And so that's the group I'm looking at. Now, those people may go on visits to sites where murders, again, this will
and this is dark tourism.
This is dark tourism, so you've got official dark tourism, and then you've got the more folky style of dark tourism, which is kind of what I look at. But there would be individuals that maybe travel to those sites. They may take mementos from those sites. They may, this is the more authentic and probably more extreme, but they may want items connected to murders. They may wear T-shirts that have Dharma on it and have a quote that he may have made. They may engage in tattooing their body, and I'm actually writing a piece for a symposium in May on dark fans and their sort of identity construction through dark tattoo commitment. So theirs is a more extreme engagement with the material, and they become much more committed to it, I think. A commitment is probably one of the key things.
And do they appear on TikTok, like you were saying? Do they just sort of demonstrate this on social media, YouTube, TikTok?
Online participation is quite a big part of it, I think. Yeah, they certainly do. And I think, you know, while I think you've got that kind of dark fans as a very clear thing, and then me and Megan are more interested, or certainly I can speak for myself, but I think Megan as well, of the kind of casual true crime viewer. So I guess there's not, people wouldn't say they're necessarily fans, but they're part of the true crime community. This idea of community is very important. And what comes out of our study on TikTok is this idea of certain people trying to police is maybe the police the parameters of what a community can be and what it should be. There's a lot of judgment of these more dark fan practices, which probably only adds to their enjoyment a little bit. But I guess that to a point, it's the way in which what's important is the way in which shows themselves encourage those things. Because what we really care about is the ethics of true crime as a genre in a general sense. Like, is it ethical to even watch these shows and partake in these shows, especially with how big they are, and certainly how big they are now. But these shows, certain shows, and we were saying this in the dark, what's it called, Web of Death?
Oh, Web of Death,
this kind of, how does the show encourage a certain reading? So if a show frames, I mean, let's take the Jeffrey Dahmer tapes, for example, which was released by Joe Berling, a massive show on Netflix. The first episode of that's called Sympathy for the Devil. It's encouraging a certain reading of Dharma.
The
which is seen as like, an anti-hero. It's a Rolling Stones song, it's cool. I mean, those kind of things encourage not just a kind of morbid curiosity, which I think we probably all have, and is kind of fine, but also encourages those much kind of deeper
emotional
sort of crossing of a threshold almost, in which people engage on a deeper level.
Yeah, and what's the ethics? We mentioned this word murderabilia, if I've got that right.
Yeah.
What's the ethics of taking an object from a crime scene or as a souvenir, and then what do they do with that object once they've got it?
So
Dark fans.
There's a historical thing with this. I mean, people used to visit the gallows in like the 1500s, 1400s, or not anywhere that a death occurred, and usually a traumatic one. People were dipping hankies in the blood of executed killers and taking that home, but they were seeing it from a more talismanic charm basis.
Bring luck.
Yeah, but also like to heal themselves, to protect themselves. So there's this the criminal bodies had this like magic to it in history. So it builds on what we see as a boom now, but it's actually kind of inherent in society. So those that might be considered dark fans, there's one gentleman that I say gentleman, who a bit of judgment person who he sells a lot of these items, and he went to the dilapidated mansion of Armin Meus, the German cannibal, the Craigslist killer. So he murdered a fellow person and ate a part of him. So he was imprisoned. But this dark fan travelled to this mansion and took various things. Notably, he took the bathtub, the fridge, because parts of the body were stored in that. And
I was thinking he was taking like little, a piece of tile work or a statue, but he's taking whole appliances.
Bits of the house and appliances. But that fridge, because of, it's all to do with connotations, but people associate, well, he killed someone and ate them. The fridge is where you keep things that you're going to eat, so therefore this has meaning and significance. So those items become something that they can exchange subcultural capital with other dark fans and show their sort of positioning in the hierarchy. They can show power through this knowledge, and they can construct and build and perpetuate that identity, all through transgression. So these items reinforce it, and it's a material aspect of this came from a crime, therefore it's imbued with the energy of that space.
Rarity as well, isn't it? Like fandom's all about rarity.
Exclusivity and authenticity.
And these, there's no more. There's only one of those fridges. There's only one, and it's kind of the shock factors. So being anti-ethical becomes something that's desirable, essentially pushing the boundary further.
The most macabre.
The most macabre. The worst is instantly.
Is best.
There's other subcultures that heavy metal subculture, music subcultures, certain ones will go. But this pushes that even, that bit further, and it's
absolutely.
So these objects are pricey then? Is there a black market for these objects?
I'm instantly thinking of some fingernails. It's a complete set, although one's broken. Bothers me. So there are websites. The one that I've looked at most recently for a conference we're doing, a conference panel, is serialpleasures.com. There are a couple of others, Murder Auction and Serial Killer Inc. On Murder Auction, I think this was just fingernails. So these are the corporeal effects of a killer. Cut off his fingernails but they're all displayed in a case. I think they're selling for £3,000.
Wow.
Yeah. The bathroom tile, 150.
Right.
So, some of these items, again, there's a hierarchy of worth here. So, dark fans might engage in correspondence with a serial killer. And of course, between the 80s and early 2000s, there was more of a boom in this sort of activity because that's where the notable names were incarcerated. But a lot of the, they might, as I say, engage in letter writing, then they keep those letters, and now they're being sold on, Facebook groups as well as officiated sites. So, but it goes up the levels of what those items are. I think the closer to the corpse that was created, the more power is given to that item, and thus the more worth is given to it. Thus it sells for more. But that's just my thesis.
No, and you are working on the PhD right now, and both of you are currently researching and presenting at conferences, which is fascinating stuff. And clearly there's a larger academic community focused on this. The popularity, as you said, on top of the boom is people looking at it as a sort of academic research topic. And that's fascinating in itself, the macabre interest in those who are interested in the macabre. It's an interesting research topic, and I know you've said yourself it can be a little troubling at times, a little bit disconcerting.
It can be tricky. Yeah, I think it's tricky.
Yeah, and I mean, we've discussed this before, like the ethics of us even looking at this. And I mean, we consume it too, like as a byproduct of writing about it. And yeah, we've talked a bit about kind of if we ever happen to make money from anything, which we probably won't, but if we ever happen to make money from anything that we do, we definitely like donate it to like the victims advocacy group or something like that.
Well, you're in the right business not to make money.
Exactly.
Academic publishing, I can guarantee it's about 10p a year.
It's tricky though, because you know, we're often, I mean, slightly different from people. We're writing purely about the ethics of these things and sometimes who has the right to tell the story. Then do we have the right to reflect on that? So, you know, where's our position as academics? I think that's really important because we're not, and we shouldn't be free from, we're part of that industry, basically. We're critiquing an industry then we're kind of part of, and that's very tricky, and we need to be really careful and mindful of that, as well as mindful of how much of the stuff we watch and how far down those kinds of avenues we go, because it can be, you know, it's difficult and hard to see and hard to watch.
That's excellent stuff. Well, thank you very much for taking the time and coming to talk about true crime TV. Gives me some things to maybe seek out and look on Netflix and Hulu, and maybe some things to avoid.
Maybe.
But thank you. That's about all the time we have for today. If you have any questions about what we've been talking about, and I'm sure that's inspired plenty, you can pop those below the video on YouTube in the comments section, and we'll try and get back to you. But for now, my thanks go to Dr. Simon Hobbs.
Thanks very much.
Dr. Megan Hoffman.
Thanks, Lincoln.
And Tia Price.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've been discussing True Crime TV because pop matters.